Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd with the best teeth in the game. And it's time for another edition of Let's Argue, where I take your hot takes, unpopular opinions, and tough questions. I respond to them literally in this video. Let's go! Ameer deserves a career. Nobody deserves a career. Assuming we're talking about a career in the music industry, that is. I think your average person out there does deserve a job, the ability to work and make a living for themselves, an honest living. But look, the industry, despite how much we like to just nerd out here and talk about music, a lot of your success in the music industry comes down to your likability, your ability to draw a crowd, people's interest in you. And if Ameer can't drum up that interest, or if he endangers that interest by doing things that go against the wishes of his fans or things that displease his fans, yeah, he's basically shooting his own career in the foot. And I mean, if he's doing that, who's to say he deserves one? Ameer will have a career going forward most likely as long as he has a base of fans who he is essentially giving to them what they want from him. Of course, that demand and what this audience desires from him may shift over time, and his ability to maintain their interest will depend on whether or not he changes with those demands. But if he can successfully do that going forward, then I guess he will continue to have a career that I guess he deserves to have because he's putting in the work that he needs to in order to have it. Marijuana truly is a gateway drug. Nobody tries LSD or cocaine or essentially any other street drug without smoking pot first. Yeah, but a vast majority of people who smoke marijuana don't end up on these drugs. And also, let's think about this situation contextually. I mean, are these people getting hooked on marijuana because they just like smoking weed and they just love drugs in general, and once you start that drug, it inevitably sets you on a path because you just have this itch for trying other drugs, etc.? Or is the fact that in this country that we live in, where marijuana is still pretty much on a federal level illegal, and it creates a black market for things such as marijuana, people are likely to get hooked on harder drugs when they seek out drugs such as marijuana, because seeking out marijuana puts them within proximity of a black market of other drugs. It puts them face to face with dealers who may have laced that marijuana with something else, or are trying to get them on a drug that is more addictive, because as a dealer, you want repeat customers. There's also a whole series of other factors that lead people to and keep people in a cycle of drug addiction, such as poverty, the way we criminalize addiction in this country, that are much greater in terms of like influencing this trend that you're talking about. It's more of a correlation not equaling causation type of thing. The Money Store is an 8 when adjusted for inflation. Frankly, I mean, I think The Money Store is still a pretty significant record. I think Death Grips, the closest they've come to outdoing this record was with Bottomless Pit, which in many respects was like a revitalization of a lot of the ideas and concepts and aesthetics of that album. For sure, The Money Store is not as novel as it was when it initially dropped at this point, as it is so many years old, but it's still a pretty brutal, hard-hitting, and groundbreaking moment for hip-hop. And there still aren't really that many projects out there that sound like it today. The All-American Rejects were one of the more underrated bands of the 2000s that became sadly forgotten. Despite the popularity and success they had in the past decade, they were never able to have the recognition that other bands like Fall Out Boy, MCR, and Panic at the Disco still do. Look, All-American Rejects were going platinum back in the day. So, I mean, they were a fairly popular band. But as the dust has settled and time has passed, I think what was obvious in the 2000s has become clear to just about everybody now, and that's that of all of these groups that you're listing here, like, All American Rejects are maybe the most generic of all the bands. I mean, don't get me wrong, their early stuff is pretty decent as far as very overly emotional alternative rock and pop rock goes, but they don't really have as distinct a sound or as marketable an image as Fall Out Boy or Panic at the Disco. And unlike MCR, they never came out with a classic. MCR has classics under their belt. Black Parade is a classic. All American Rejects do not have a classic. The PlayStation boot up Jingle is a 10. And this other guy said, GameCube though. I think both are great for their own reasons. The PlayStation boot up jingle, the original one, PlayStation 1, it feels like a digital orgasm. It's like, Meanwhile, the GameCube one is just like really cute and plucky and I love that one too because it's really fun and stimulating and gets you ready to play and do something cool. But if I had to pick between the two, I'm gonna go with digital orgasm. Lou the Human isn't getting enough credit for his artistic growth and has been pigeonholed into an Eminem clone unfairly. Who is saying this? Where's this narrative coming from? I mean, I have acknowledged that Lou the Human does have some Eminem influences to what he does, but for the most part I've spoken about those in a positive light. I'm sure there are maybe some other people out there who've spoken about them in a negative way, but I only think Lou has employed the obvious Eminem influences in his stuff up until this point in a way that has benefited him. His new record, though, I really haven't cared all that much for. The super pillowy, hazy production on there, a lot of the singing on there I thought was pretty lackluster. Yeah, I mean, the rapping is solid, you know, when there is rapping on the record. I think if anything is holding the album back, at least in my opinion, it's his weakness on those fronts, not any similarity that he may have to Eminem. But I don't know, maybe that's not the prevailing opinion. I guess I don't really follow why people do or don't fuck with Lou the Human. With the prevalence of platforms like Netflix, more artists should pursue the concept of album movies, feature-length music videos soundtracked by records, in the same vein as Interstellar 5555. It's a really cool, interesting thought, but here's the thing. I mean, the attention span of the audience, I feel, is so short and it's so easily distracted these days. And while Netflix is an amazing platform, I feel like in order to deliver such a product to the audience, you would have to have a huge budget, be really ambitious, sink tons and tons and tons of time into it, and interrupt potentially your album release schedule, which given the current saturated music field needs to be busy. I mean, I think there are some artists who are talented and beloved enough to disappear in the shadows, work on a film for like a year or two, and come back with a new album after like 5 years of people waiting since the last album. They've also got to have a huge budget and backing from Netflix on it, so they've pretty much already got to have like a built-in audience there ready to watch the film when they release it. The only artists that I could foresee doing such a thing are like maybe Frank Ocean or Bjork or Lana Del Rey. I guess I could foresee Kanye doing such a thing at some point too, but I don't know, I just think it would be tough. And I'm thinking of all of the financial obligations and pressures that face many musicians today, and I'm just wondering if doing such a thing would even be like a good move for most musicians out there, even some of the biggest ones. People hate to acknowledge Lana Del Rey and Lorde as pioneers of the alternative moaning whisper pop and how it influenced Billie Eilish and others. Do they hate to acknowledge that? I personally don't hate to acknowledge that. I mean, I have mentioned that I thought Billie's early stuff, like her early EP stuff, was very reminiscent of at least Lorde, and wasn't really doing much for me personally. But I think that she's kind of grown into a style of her own. Still, that doesn't mean that she wasn't influenced. The influence is still obviously there, but I think she's evolved into her own thing. Lana Del Rey and Lorde have certainly been influential in the pop field. I'm ready to acknowledge that. Why aren't you? Or are you ready to acknowledge that? I personally am not seeing this lack of will to acknowledge this. I don't know. You're snoozing on the Lumineers and you should feel bad. The only time I feel bad in relation to the Lumineers is when I'm listening to the Lumineers. I personally have no interest in the Lumineers. I see no reason in listening to or praising basically a bunch of stale, old, rehashed indie folk isms from the past 15 years and then reduced down in such a sweet, basic, and lowest common denominator way that it just basically sounds like the soundtrack to a car commercial. No interest in that. The Cure had a better 80s run than the Smiths. I don't know if I can really come to a decision here. Both bands are incredibly influential. I don't know if you could really compare one's influence against another. I think that the Smiths' discography is incredibly consistent and solid, pretty much flawless. Meanwhile, The Cure, yeah, they put out some duds over the years, but a lot more records, a lot more records. And I think that there are some elements of their early stuff that are a bit overrated. However, I also think there are some Smiths records that are overrated too. Me is Murder. Oh, this one is so hard. Both have their own distinct sounds and styles, and lots of songs that I love and think are fantastic. Fuck you. I hate you. I hate you for asking me this. JPEGMAFIA is cringy and tries too hard to be edgy. I can't think of anything he does that's particularly new or surprising. I think Peggy's brand of glitchy production is pretty unique to him. I think the way that he infuses pop rap and trap rap into his stuff is unique to him. The only artist that I could think is kind of close to that is Clipping, and I don't really think they're all that comparable. If you think JPEGMAFIA's music is overly edgy, that's because you are in the group of people that it is meant to offend. And you may, in fact, be a wee bit offended. And I don't know, that is what it is. The album My Name is Joe is a masterpiece. I've seen this before. I know how this goes. I'm gonna say, oh, well, this is a pretty cool album. Yeah, I like this album from Joe. And you're like, Joe No, but seriously, R&B artist Joe, who I vaguely remember from the 2000s. This album of his, from what I've been able to assess going back and listening to it, isn't a bad one, but actually his previous one that dropped in 1997 I think is a little bit better. I think the instrumentals are more classic. I think the songwriting and the vocals are a bit more impassioned and exciting. I think there are too many aesthetics on My Name is Joe that just kind of seem like a little I guess trendy for 2000s R&B, I suppose. All That I Am really has that classic frickin' 90s sound, and the songwriting is so good on a lot of the songs too. The vocals are impeccable. There's no unnecessary features or anything like that. It's just a really good quality, classy, I would say almost timeless 90s R&B album. And I am going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for watching. This has been the latest edition of Let's Argue. You're the best, you're the best, you're the best, 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 you're the best, you're the best, you're the best, best, best. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Let's Argue forever.